our favorite Grasslands PR team. Our favorite, hopefully your favorite as well. This week we're back with another reason why these overlooked and underappreciated ecosystems are objectively the best biome. I'm Rachel.
I'm Nicole.
And I'm Alan. And I'm here to talk to you guys today about a topic. You already know what this topic is.
Nematodes.
Well, no, that's part of it.
All nematodes all the time.
Well, I don't know if anyone needs to talk. I don't know if anyone wants to listen to a full hour on nematodes.
I would.
It's broader than that.
Okay.
But I want to start before we get into this. Okay. I asked you guys a question.
Oh, God.
Something to think about. Tell me what's a science fact that when you learned it really just changed the way that you perceived the world around you. I
mean, I have one.
Okay, great. I want to hear it.
I don't change the way I perceive the world is kind of a lot, but one of my favorite ones that just kind of weirds me out. Anything to do with the human body, honestly. But specifically the fact that we physically cannot feel the sensation of wet. I don't like it. The more you think about it, the more.
Hang on.
Yeah, no, I've heard, right? Because the neurons in our skin or whatever only feel
cold,
temperature
hot.
and pressure.
Yeah.
So wetness as a feeling is an illusion or something? Is that right?
Yeah. So we know things are wet because they're cold. Usually.
I'm really uncomfortable right now.
See, it's a weird fact.
It is weird. Okay, yeah, that's a good one, actually. Anything about how the brain works, honestly, is confusing and alarming. Yeah. So, that's a good one.
Thank you.
I accept your offering, Nicole.
Thank you.
Rachel?
I think mine is somewhere around the first time I realized just how badly climate change was going to indirectly impact specifically Arctic birds, I guess, and I was like, oh, it's not just that they're gonna be ooh, it's too warm up here, let's go somewhere colder, but it was more oh, the timing of when the insects are hatching is not going to align with when their chicks hatch that have a very specific feeding regimen, and the diets of this species change over time, and it's oh wait, no, just the timing of everything is going to go haywire and we're all doomed. Really changed my perspective of the world.
That's nice.
Yeah. That's a good one too, Rachel. Maybe a little bleak, but that's okay. I mean, it's valid, yeah. Phenology and the timing of things is fascinating because that it's the way that these relationships are so specifically timed is to the week or the a very small period, and yes, it's very easy to get screwed up.
Yep.
It is grim stuff to start your podcast with, but
you asked.
I did ask, and it's a valid answer. It's good. Can I tell you mine?
Please.
Okay.
That's what we're here for, right?
Feel wet?
Yes.
Is it? No.
It is. We're actually going to just talk about that for an hour. I decided.
Fantastic.
No. Okay. So mine, I heard this probably 10 years ago for the first time. When I was working at a nature preserve in Texas, we would do this program, and it was built around this article that was it was way back from Chicago Wilderness Magazine or something in 1999, right? This is an old article, but the article was so well done. They interviewed this professor at the University of Illinois, Chicago, and he was telling a story in this article about soil. Okay. And the term he used, or a phrase he used in the article, was that a prairie is an upside down rainforest. Okay. That really stuck with me. The idea that when we look at a grassland, most of the biological activity, most of the biomass, most of the living things are not on top or above the soil, right? They are in the soil. Mm-hmm. They are beneath the ground. Okay. Mm. learning that really, like, I feel like transforms the way that I look at these habitats, since this is like I've lived my whole life in areas that are, grasslands primarily, lived on the Great Plains. And so, like, anytime you're looking at that, it's really transformed the way that I think about it, the way I understand it. So we used to do this article, by the way, was called Adventures in the Rhizosphere. And we'll talk about it a little bit more. It was just really well done, the way this professor told this story. It was kind of that you're reading it and you're like, man, this guy must have been like a really good teacher. Just the way he's like describing things. It's like, it was very engaging and a lot of fun to read. And we'd reference that when we were taking kids to go do some basic kind of soil science experiments, right? So that's what we're going to be talking about today. We are going to be talking about soil.
The rhizosphere.
The rhizosphere, yes. And we're going to think very hard about dirt.
Okay.
Okay.
Ready. With all the schooling I had at K-State about wildlife management and ecology and ecological stuff, we never did anything with soil.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Never?
Never.
I never have either.
Really? Mm-hmm. That is concerning.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
And actually we'll be talking a little bit later in the podcast about why that might be an issue. Okay.
Why that might have happened, or why it's extra bad?
Well, because there's a lot of wildlife management and a lot of prairie restoration that people are trying to do. Mm-hmm. But, well, okay, let me phrase it differently. That's concerning because it's such a huge part. It's a very essential part of the ecology of the habitats we're trying to protect, or trying to restore. I feel like it's crazy to not have a fundamental understanding of soils.
Right?
I think when students go into like the biology track, soils typically get lumped into geology.
Yeah. That's my impression too.
They also might get pushed over kind of to like College of Agriculture a bit more, since people are primarily concerned with the functionality of soils and the viability of soils more so than, some of the other aspects of it. So I guess it's understandable how people who are biologists study living things maybe are just ignoring this.
Is it understandable?
It's understandable, but it doesn't mean it's defensible, I guess.
Okay,
you know
okay,
what
okay.
I mean, right?
Yeah. Sure.
Like, I would say if you're a student who's interested in biology, you should go out of your way to take a soil science elective. Like, I ended up doing that in college because specifically at this nature preserve I worked at, we used to do these soil programs, and I was like, this stuff is crazy. I want to take a class on this.
Okay.
Yes. So I would recommend doing that. And if you have an interest in biology, then yeah, this is a topic that should interest you as well. So we're going to dive into that.
I have a soil fact for you.
You have a soil fact?
Yeah.
All right, hit me.
Can soil feel wet?
I don't know if soil can, but a lot of the things inside the soil can.
Yeah.
Like wormies and like crustaceans, like isopods.
Cool.
And bugs.
I didn't mean to hijack your fact. Go ahead.
I mean, that's it. That was my fact. That some things in the soil feel wet.
Oh, for real?
Wait, they legitimately feel wet.
Yeah.
Not like the fake way that we do.
No. They have the correct receptors to feel wet.
I can't believe that was your
us.
actual soil fact.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Wait, how do you know that?
Not the soil itself, but the things inside of it. Yeah.
I know, yeah. Mm-hmm. The mesosphere. We talked about this. Mesofauna.
Yes. Well, and that makes sense because a lot of the soil organisms have adapted from aquatic organisms, and they need to exist. To exist in a soil environment, you need to be able to detect like very thin films of water that might exist in the interstitial space in soil. So it's, to actually survive and find, liquid water, you probably do have to be able to sense it pretty adequately. Yeah. So yeah, that is an interesting fact.
Thank you. That's all I got.
Good stuff. Before we go into talking about the soil ecosystem, though, I did, especially since my co-hosts, it sounds like haven't done like a soil science, like, you haven't had this like.
Why are you
What?
laughing
Continue.
so hard?
Since my co-hosts are real dumb, I have to really break this down.
Well, I'll go back
No,
and
it's
rephrase it.
perfect.
No, it was perfect. Please continue. It was just funny.
Since we might need just to like touch on some basic stuff about soil science before we go into talking about the soil ecosystem, and what are some of the consequences that has for conservation. Okay, so we're going to talk about 3 things just to understand soil science in general terms. Okay? The first thing is that soil is not only superficial. We're not talking about just the few inches of soil that might sit under your lawn, okay, outside. Soil scientists actually look at the full profile of soil. So we're going down past that superficial layer, which you would call topsoil, right, into like deeper subsoils and substratum, and then down into the actual bedrock, the material from which all the soil originally forms by weathering, erosion, and other processes, right? So you're looking straight from like the very top surface of the environment that you're in, all the way down to the feature that is solid rock. That's everything that they're considering soil. So they actually like break that into horizons typically. So and this was a part of that soil science class, was actually going out and digging a hole. Okay, this is like one of the labs we did. We needed to go out, and wherever we were, we had to like pick a random like survey spot and dig a hole there. And not just like a little hole, like it had to be pretty deep. Okay,
Shia LaBeouf deep, like
Holes.
measure it with your shovel, like.
yeah. I mean, I think I probably dug like 4 feet down.
Oh,
Yeah, it was weird.
it's like the hole's hole.
Yeah. It's like you had to like get in this hole and do measurements to see what the soil horizons were and like their depth, and take some do some observations qualitatively about them and that sort of thing. So the very top layer of soil, they call that an O horizon. That's just like the organic stuff, like the stuff that's like little bits of dead stuff, dead leaves, things like that. Like sometimes it's just called humus, right? The stuff that's actively breaking down on the surface. That's what you call your O, or your organic horizon. Then below that, you have your topsoil, okay? What they would call the A horizon, and it goes down from there to B, which would be like subsoils, which is a little bit, it's not very fertile. Like there's not a lot of biological activity happening down there, but there is still a lot of chemical activity, right? There's a lot of parent, the parent rock and stuff down there, and then you would go further down into that, into like a substrata. So these soil like layers, they interact with each other, right? It's not just like all like a top down thing. There's like things that come up because plant roots are moving things up into higher layers of soil. Groundwater, right? Things are like salts and stuff in the groundwater get absorbed by plant roots and brought back up into the soil. Rainwater and things like that leach things down further into the soil. You have the soil compacting and forming tighter layers and changing over time. There's really like there's a lot going on. So that's why it's important to look at the whole thing, right? Down to like the actual geological features that are underlying the whole thing, right? So yeah, that's one important note about soil.
And so all of that like movement is how you mentioned the parent material like eroding, and I was having a hard time imagining how that could happen when it's like literally so far underground, but it's because there's all that interaction still happening.
Yeah, there is. Like the soil turns over time, right? And we'll talk about that in a minute, but like the actual processes of soil, because they are constant and they are ongoing, right? It's not like soil's not just a static thing, it is changing. But since we talked about this brings us to the second point first, which would be the diversity of soil. And this part is very difficult. Like, okay, Soil taxonomy is a thing.
Oh.
I don't know if you've heard of this, or if like, I know like most dirt feels kind of the same. Like, you know, if you drive around, it's like, oh, there's some like reddish dirt. Ooh, there's some like black dirt, you know? Okay.
I know we have like a state dirt or something.
We
Yeah.
do. It's called the Harney Soil Series in Kansas. And a soil series is basically like a species of soil. That would be like the species level in their taxonomy. Okay.
Do soils evolve? I'm sorry.
Do soils evolve? Kind of, yeah. I mean, they do change, right? On a scale not unlike, I guess, evolutionary time, because we're talking about geologic processes here. So yeah. So
That's fun.
if we're talking about the taxonomy of soil, they like the levels of it. A soil series would be like a species. At the very top, you have orders of soil, and it goes down into suborders, great groups, subgroups, families, and series. Just kind of like we go from like, you know, kingdom all the way to genus and species, right?
Great groups.
Great groups.
That's cute.
How many species or series of soil do you think exist in the United States?
400.
Good guess.
I'm gonna go with 600.
600. 19,000.
Oh God.
19,000 species or series of soil.
That makes more sense.
It's wild. Okay. The U.S. Soil Survey, which is something that you can go and you can actually look up the exact kind of soil that you have at your house, at the park you like to go to, at, you know, whatever property you live near. You can look that soil up and get the complete breakdown of it. It's crazy.
Wow.
The amount of time and effort that has been dedicated to people thinking about soil is wild.
That is insane. I was just
I
like
love that.
realizing how, I mean, like it's one thing to catalog bugs, but like to go around the entire country and dig dirt and catalog dirt.
Yes.
19,000 dirts.
19,000 dirts. Yeah, it's crazy. It's really crazy.
How do you identify? You know what? We don't need to talk about
No,
all the
we will
details
talk
right now.
about that.
Oh, okay,
actually.
great.
So, yes, 19,000 soil series in the United States. Right here in Sedgwick County, Kansas, which is where we are recording this podcast, we have 86.
Wow.
Okay.
86?
At the park we like to go to sometimes, Pawnee Prairie, they have 9 different kinds of soil.
What?
Wow.
Yeah.
What?
And it makes sense, right? Like, the way, if you look at the Soil Series website, like, you know, when we go to that park, there's like there's a little grassland, there's a little prairie section with some like horse trails on it that you walk through first. Different soil type than when you get back to the area with the creek where the woods begin. Okay. Different soil types. If you're specifically wondering.
Just because of all the stuff that's alive on it?
That's part of it. Yeah. So these different kinds of soils obviously support different kinds of plant communities, and will that based on their composition, right?
Is the soil supporting the plant communities, or is the plant communities just changing the soil?
Both. so that like the prairie soil, the species of it, it's Nylum loam. Loam is a great word.
Yeah.
Love it when things are described as loamy. But like if you were to look at the soil series like on the website, like they will actually break this down, just showing my co-hosts how like it is broken down by profile. Like at this depth, this is the kind of composition that it has, going all the way down 80 inches into the soil.
What is loam?
What is loam? Loam is in this context is a textural term. I feel like in general it's used as like a just loamy kind of just means like I feel like it just is synonymous with dirt, like in language, but it actually is a specific textural term in this, because there's a thing called the soil texture triangle.
Oh my God. What?
Yes. And this,
Oh.
yes. So this is something that is just a used for very general classification of soils, right? Basically, it takes a look at 3 different types of particles: sand, silt, clay. Sand particles are very large, okay, relatively speaking. Silt particles, kind of intermediary. Clay particles, very tiny. Okay, very, very tiny, like fractions of millimeters small. Okay. The ratios that you have of these different particle sizes in soil affects a lot of different things, right? From the amount of water it can retain, how easily it drains, how well it holds on to minerals and nutrients and things like that. How easy is it for plant roots to penetrate deeply? How stable is it? Okay, all of these factors matter when we're talking about the soil texture. So they generally classify things just using those 3 ratios.
Okay.
Yes.
And that particle size, not like what it's made out of.
What it's made out of is also important, but the particle size is a huge element of it.
Okay.
So when they're talking about, something is a clay, it means it's made up of mostly very tiny, very, very weathered, very highly eroded, tiny soil particles that are really sticking together.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Like you could form pottery out of them.
Right.
Yeah.
So in our state, in Kansas, we have kind of a gradient of soils. You get very clayey soils out in the eastern part of the state. You get very sandy soils out in the western part of the state, which, and you see a difference in like the kinds of plant communities we have. It's very woodsy out in the east. You get tall grass prairies. In the eastern part, you get short grass prairies in the western part of the state, right? Mixed grass in the middle. There was probably the most mind-numbing field job I've ever had was an experiment where they were looking at how the root biomass is different in these soils. And so I was hanging out with a bunch of dirt, like hundreds of soil cores. I think I did 800 some soil cores, processed them, which basically meant you were taking them and rinsing them through filters to try and get the root biomass out of it and filter it down. But the breaking down these soil cores would be very different, because if you have like a hunk of clay, it's very hard to like rinse all that out. Okay. But some of the soils would just like completely crumble in your hand and nothing. You wouldn't even hardly need to filter it. Right. So the texture is very different and has huge consequences for, the plants and that sort of thing that are going on with it.
It makes sense, but like clay being small particles and like sand being big particles comparatively is just weird to think about.
Yeah. Right. That's, geologically how they're defining like what is a clay. Like it's the same thing. It's the same material. Largely, yeah. Like, it's from the same so it's just in a different state of how weathered it is, right?
And silt is in between.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So you got like small, medium, large.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
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 How deep are those soil cores? Like I've as somebody who's never seen a soil core.
Yeah. They were probably about a foot deep.
Okay.
So yeah, we were just looking at like the top layer of the root biomass there.
How wide? What's the diameter?
Like Coke can size. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, it's not so bad.
No, just had several entire fridges full of soil.
Refrigerators.
Yeah.
Soil.
You want to keep it. You don't want that. You don't want it the roots to decay.
Oh yeah.
Because you're trying to measure it.
Yeah, you got to keep your nematodes moist.
Yes, you sure do, guys. That was that job was. It was kind of meditative in a way, because you're just like, I'm just handling dirt all day long. But also, dang, was it mind numbing? It was hardcore boring sometimes.
Yeah.
I listen to a lot of podcasts.
That's good.
So yeah, soil is incredibly diverse. Obviously, and the exact textures, the exact materials, the slope of the soil, the other features near the soil have big implications for what that soil can support and what it might be used for. Okay, so that's why they study all this. That's why they need to know this sort of thing. Before we move on from that, I did want to mention briefly the 12 soil orders, because they are like, they're so different. Like, this is like the big classification, right? Because there's some fun ones, right?
Okay.
Like, there's I feel like I'm this is very nerdy to talk about.
I love it.
That's the point of all of this, you know?
You're
Like,
right.
you're fully in the
shouldn't,
vein of what's
okay.
important.
But like, okay, for example, there are 12 soil orders. One of them is called andosols. Okay. Ando being the Japanese word for black. Okay, these are very dark, extremely rich soils. The key feature of that soil order is that they are from volcanic material. Okay. Which gives it a very like, and there's a lot of grasslands that have like andesol soils that are very, very unique. Like the Paramos in South America, like up in the Andes. Okay, those come from like volcanic. Those soils there were formed by volcanic processes originally.
Okay.
So they're super nutrient rich. It's like crazy, crazy dark soils with lots of very specific, volcanic minerals in them that give rise to a very interesting ecosystem. Another one that I really like is gellisols.
Soil people have the weirdest names. I'm just gonna throw that out there.
Well, so this one comes from like, okay, do you guys know what the word gelid means? This was a word that was used in
I feel like I should.
The fifth season a lot.
I know,
They
yeah.
use the word gelid over and over again.
Geladon. Yeah, I'm ashamed to admit that I don't know what this means.
It's okay. I had to look it up the first time I heard it because I was like, that's so weird. But yeah, it means icy. So gellisols are soils that actually have permafrost in them.
Oh.
So these are like, high latitude tundra type soils where the actual freezing processes inside them is playing a role in turning that soil over and changing the way that it is structured.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's really neat. The ones that are typically identified with grasslands, though, is a soil order called mollisols, which would mean soft soils, right? Like mollifying. Okay. You got mollisols, which are what we think of as very dark and very fluffy kinds of soils that are, perfect for deep-rooted grassland plants. They're kind of special because of this huge layer on top called an epipedon, which the soils that we have on grasslands form a specific kind of, like, they aggregate in a very specific way because of the types of particles that are in them, which makes them very fluffy, which makes them very good for grass. Not so great for other kinds of plants necessarily.
Okay.
Yeah,
Good to dig in.
Good to dig in, exactly. Okay, so those are some soil orders. Okay, so soil's very diverse. That's point number 2. Soil's not just superficial. Number 1. Soil's very diverse. Number 2. Number 3 is just that the soil processes are very slow. They are constant, and they are complex.
When you say soil processes, do you mean like the geologic stuff?
I mean all of it, right? So this isn't just geological stuff, because there are, that's part of it, the weathering, okay, but also the way nutrients cycle in the atmosphere is part of it. Biological activity on the ground and beneath it. The movement of water, okay, and air, right? All of these things are contributing to the way a soil forms. How long do you think it takes to create soil?
16,000.
16,000
years.
years? That would create a lot of soil. For like an inch of topsoil, it takes about 500 years
Okay.
to form. That's a lot. Okay, like that's a very that kind of puts in perspective the pace at which these processes are happening are so slow that really puts in perspective how valuable of a resource soil is, to be able to like push your finger into the ground just up to like the first knuckle, and you've like pushed through 500 years of geologic processes,
Good grief.
right? When people talk about soil erosion being a huge concern, like once that topsoil is gone, once it is degraded, once it is, it poses a huge issue because it is not easy to get back. Yes, Rachel.
Should we be concerned about the fact that you can just buy bags of topsoil
Where does that come from?
from the store?
Stolen from somewhere.
Where do
Yeah.
bags of topsoil come from?
Yeah. Should we be concerned about that?
Maybe. I actually don't know where like a lot of like large, like the box store kind of, topsoil bags, or I don't know where that's sourced from. That'd be interesting to know.
Is it possible to manufacture it?
I mean, you can compost things. Yeah. I mean, that is essentially what you're doing by composting, is manufacturing soil. In sort of a very quick way, manufacturing like an functional organic layer of soil.
But you said that the organic layer was a different layer from the topsoil layer.
Yeah, it is. It is. They're very closely connected. Like that really is a great question. Like, because some of these things do come from, like, a lot of people will use, add sphagnum or peat moss to, their gardens. And that, if that's harvested from peat bogs, like that is not a very sustainable resource, right?
Yeah.
That is not, that is, again, something that takes a long time to accumulate. And once it's gone, it's just going to be gone. There's a lot of, there are some pretty unsustainable practices in terms of how soil is like bagged up and stuff. There's always better options when you're looking for compost and things like that, that are going to be more sustainable.
I know like river rock and stuff is literally harvested from rivers, and like there'll be like turtle eggs and stuff in it. Yeah.
Oh my god.
It's not good. Don't think about it too much.
Okay. Oh god, it's too late. Wait, but isn't that like, oh my god, so this is feeling like the soil version of cultivars for me, where now I'm wondering like, how much are we contaminating soils by just dragging soils all over the country in bags and dumping them wherever we want?
Yeah, that's another great question.
Are soils going extinct? Is that possible?
So there is some concern about, when people are talking about soil conservation and soil erosion, there is a concern of like, do we have a limited number of times left in which we could, cultivate and harvest this soil before we have essentially exhausted it? And it's a legitimate question. It's there are people who I think trend more alarmist or pessimistic about it, and there are others who are maybe Rachel's pointing to herself. And there are others who are maybe have a more relaxed view of it. I don't know, but it's definitely a concern. I think that is one of the questions that soil scientists do attempt to answer through their study. But yeah, because these processes are so slow. There are things that are involved. We talked about ice being potentially involved in some soils. Like there's all sorts of stuff that is involved in soil development that you wouldn't think about necessarily. Even like lightning. Lightning basically blows nitrogen up in the atmosphere. It'll blow up like what is it? I forget. But so nitrogen, like it blows nitrogen atoms apart, and so they bind with oxygen. So when there's lightning, it's going from its little diatomic form, little N2, splitting apart, and then it's binding with oxygen and becoming a nitrate.
Oh, yeah.
And then that washes into the soil, and then stuff in the soil turns the nitrate into ammonium, which is fertilizer. Like when people are fertilizing, they're using ammonia to fertilize. And then that is getting pulled up into plants and things like that.
Because lightning fertilizes.
Yeah. You have said that before.
Have said that before.
You have said that again.
Yeah, we're just in a different context now.
No, it's okay.
My brain couldn't reach it.
Yeah. But yeah, so all that stuff matters. All those factors contribute to the eventual breakdown and formation of soil. It just takes a very long time, and it's always happening. One of the faster elements of like soil formation though, and in the way the structure changes, is caused by the living stuff though. Okay, by the plant communities, by the animals themselves. And so that brings us into what is the most interesting part of this for me, which is the soil ecosystem, right? Because there is so much going on out there. The book Prairie by Candace Savage, okay, which, yeah, I've got a copy of it right there. It's a really good primer on some of this stuff, right? On just the way grasslands are structured. She does a great kind of overview of the soil ecosystem. And so I'll be talking about that just a little bit, but also that article, that Adventures in the Rhizosphere.
Yeah.
The reason I love it so much is because they start you out like, they're like, okay, we're gonna like shrink ourselves down to like like a micron, and we're gonna start in the dirt, and we're gonna like explore this ecosystem from like teeny tiny and magnify it out, right?
That's
So
great Magic School Bus energy.
that's what I'm talking about. I love it. Okay. So so let's start out. Let's kind of take that journey then, that that rhizosphere journey. Okay, so we go down. We start at teeny tiny as bacteria sized. Okay, soil bacteria incredibly abundant. If you take like it's typically said that if you take a teaspoon of a grassland soil, there is like 5 billion living things in it. Okay, which is hard to wrap your head around, right? But a lot of it is bacteria down there. Oh yes, something up.
She was squishing the
squishing.
bacteria.
Oh, you're squishing yourself down.
5
yes.
billion animals at once.
Yeah. That bacteria is constantly, breaking down living things, consuming stuff, excreting stuff. Okay. And it helps to create like a film that helps soil aggregate.
Nice.
The sheer amount of this bacteria that exists on plant roots, it exists on dead stuff, exists in the water down there. All that bacteria, helps promote like the way soil like sticks together, creates like a living glue for soil, which is kind of gross, but also very important, right?
Come on.
Yeah, no, some of that bacteria in soil also does more for like the actual chemical composition of the soil too. Like legumes have something called nitrogen fixing bacteria.
Yes.
You're familiar with that term.
Nodules on their roots.
The nodules, yes. The nodules, like, yeah, they host a bacterial infection, right?
Oh my God, when you put it that way, that's very weird. It's like they've got permanent pimples.
Oh no. Yeah, it kind of is though. But it's a good thing, right? Because those bacteria, they like actually they put some of those like those nitrates, like they will consume that and put that into the soil as ammonia. So like it's really important to have this bacteria doing this stuff like all the time, just because they're constantly changing the chemistry of the soil.
Okay.
It's a good thing. It's weird and it's cool.
Okay.
It's sticking it all together out there. Okay, so that's like the base of the soil ecosystem would be all the bacteria. You've got stuff that eats the bacteria. Then you've got amoebas and some other like protozoa that would consume the bacteria, and that sort of helps shape shapes the community of it as well. Going up a little bit larger than that, you would have you would start to have things that dial that back first of all. Mm-hmm. Another big thing that you have in there is the fungus happening in soil, right?
Oh,
yeah, because Sorry, I'm gonna try to. I'm gonna try to talk about fungus without bringing up The Last of Us.
You don't have to.
You have to.
It's too closely associated for me now. But you've got obviously you've got lots of plant roots in the soil, and you have mycorrhizal fungus, which we've talked about before. If you're not familiar with what mycorrhizal fungus is, this is basically fungus that symbiotically exists within these spaces in between the cells of plant roots, right? It is like what they call arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, right? It is like has a close symbiotic relationship with it's most plants in the world, I think.
I mean, probably some plants are better at like using that than others, I feel like, but yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot of it in there. And that fungus helps draw stuff out of the soil, draw nutrients out of the soil, and feed it to the plant, basically. That, and then the plant, it feeds off sugars from that the plant is producing. So it is a very, very tight, like mutualistic relationship between fungus and plant. One couldn't exist without the other. But there's stuff that exists in the soil to feed on both of them, right? To feed on the fungus, to feed on the bacteria, to feed on the plant roots. Nematodes would be a big one of that, right? A big example of that. These are like multicellular creatures. Like some of them have like they're very, very tiny. Some of them are microscopic. Some of them have like 100 or 900 cells or something like that. But the sheer number of them is insane. Collectively, like if you took a pasture, though, this is something Candace Savage says in her book. If you took a pasture, and had a herd of cattle on that pasture, the nematodes are going to be consuming plant material at a rate twice that of the cattle. Okay, just through the constant collective action of these tiny microscopic worms just nibbling little bits, teeny tiny bites on plant roots and fungus, right? They're just the amount of like subsurface grazing that they're doing and breaking stuff down and putting, decomposing organic matter is insane.
Yeah. I thought they ate bacteria.
Some of them do. So there are carnivorous nematodes. There are like nematodes that eat fungus. There are nematodes that eat other nematodes. There's fungus that eats nematodes. there are fungi that will like strangle nematodes to death and consume them.
Oh my! What?
Yeah. It's weird. There are plants that will just go out of their way to kill nematodes. They're nematocidal plants. They'll like they'll put chemicals around them to like murder nematodes. There's just like a whole constant struggle for existence happening in dirt. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, So that's like the really small stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
If we go bigger, the way they described it in the article is like, okay, we're going to go from like a bacteria, like being a micron, to being like a millimeter. So we can look at some of the larger, like hexapods and things like that. Okay.
Wait, the nematodes were still on that micron level?
They're real tiny, yeah.
Oh my god.
They're little itty bitty.
They're like 100 cells or 900 cells or something.
Depends
Oh,
on the species.
not very many
There's
cells.
so many species of
Yeah.
nematode too. There's like thousands of species.
Is there more nematodes than dirt species?
Yeah, there might be like millions of species of nematodes.
Dang.
Yeah. Okay. So let's so going up into that's like millimeter size, right? So this is the size difference that he visualizes is like an ant to an aircraft carrier. Okay. So that's how large we've like grown. Okay, we're now looking at things called springtails, which are a very fun little deal. If you had any given square meter of prairie soils, the top foot of that might contain anywhere from 10 to 15,000 little springtails. Okay, they're very abundant. But these are like little dudes they're hexapods, so they're not insects, but they are six-legged, and they have like a little thing under them. They have like a little tail underneath them. And when they get alarmed, okay, they like fill that tail with fluid, and it's like hitting the ejector seat. It's like, and they fly off, right? Like people's like when people turn over compost piles, I guess, then you can like see a lot of like springtails like popping out there, like, little tiny BBs. They feed on a lot of stuff. They're like detritivores as well. You've also got tardigrades in there,
Okay.
which are very fun. People might be familiar with what those are. Sometimes they're called water bears because they are like very, like they're big, like husky, little
bumbling little friends.
Yeah, little chunky dudes, with 8 big legs and like a snout, like a sucker. They're just down there drinking plant juice, you know. But they're famous for being cryptobiotic sometimes.
What does that mean?
That's a fancy word for saying, is it alive? Is it dead? We don't know. It's kind of
Cryptic.
It's cryptic, right? Because they'll like they're adapted to survive in aquatic environments, right? But when that water goes away, they desiccate the bodies completely and shrivel up into like a little thing called a ton, TUN, a ton. And it appears to be not alive anymore, but then when you put it back in water, it's like, this tardigrade is fine again. Like it's just a weird thing about them. I think they've
sent them to space.
They've sent them to space. Yeah, they can survive in extreme cold and extreme heat. And it's also like for decades. I think like, I can't remember but like they've taken like century old plant material, rehydrated it, and then looked, and then it's like there were tardigrades on it
That were now alive.
Again. It's really bizarre. Like the survivability of these things. It's very fun. If we then go bigger than that, okay, talk about some of the predators of the soil ecosystem. This is what, yes, Rachel.
We've already had predators of the soil ecosystem.
I know, but these are like the mesopredators. Okay. This is what in the article they talk about as being like the T-Rex of the soil ecosystem. Okay. Like,
okay.
We're talking about mites.
Whoa.
Oh.
Yeah. So, okay, tiny, itty bitty little, arachnidy, chelicerate things, right?
Yes.
Okay, incredibly abundant. In that same, square meter of soil, you might have 60,000 mites that are going after little things like springtails and, tiny worms and stuff like that, just chomping it up. The reason the guy described them as T-Rexes is because like the state that mites will leave other things in resemble like fossilized like T-Rex kills. They're just like chomping through things.
Wow.
Down there.
Okay.
You've also got some other fun predators down there like pseudoscorpions. These don't have tails, right? They don't have a little stinger, but they do have pinchers that are venomous, and so they'll snatch little springtails.
The pincers are venomous?
Yeah.
Pseudoscorpions are super cool.
Wow.
They're weird.
I saw a picture on Reddit where someone just had a pseudoscorpion crawling across their keyboard, and I'm like, wow, how damp is your house?
Oh no. Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah. There are some things you don't want to see in your house.
Yeah.
Well, as you know, it's impossible to feel how wet something is. So he probably did not know.
You didn't know. You wouldn't know.
Yeah.
How could you know?
Oh my God.
And then we'll go back to the up to the larger creatures of the soil ecosystem.
Larger than a T-Rex.
Larger than a T-Rex. You have ants, which is weird because we were just being like, okay, we got from an ant to an aircraft carrier, and now we're talking about the biggest thing being an ant. Okay,
Yes,
so
yes.
but the ants are hugely important, and also earthworms. Okay, these are some of the larger soil organisms, some of the like macro invertebrates that you're going to find in a soil ecosystem. That are hugely important because of the way they move the soil, the way they transport soil, and crayfish too. Yeah. They in the book they mentioned that Aristotle called earthworms the intestines of the earth,
Nice.
Cool.
which is a kind of a gross thing to think about. But they produce their own weight in droppings every 24 hours
Nice.
in
Oh,
worm castings. So that really enriches the soil. Um,
that is like the intestine of the earth.
yeah,
Yeah.
they're just constantly digesting, constantly decomposing things, and putting it back out in carbon that other things can utilize. So yeah, it's hugely important. The ants also very active. The way that they alter the structure of soil. It's estimated that ants, through their activity, will turn over the top 2 feet of soil. Okay, so that whole topsoil layer, ants will turn that over every 100 years or so just by being ants. Okay, so moving, that's how much earth they're moving. Literally, the top 2 feet of the whole ecosystem, ants are dredging it up, exposing it to air, moving the nutrients around. Okay, just by being
Wow.
ants. Really, really wild.
So like when the top like what was it inch of
Mm-hmm.
topsoil is being generated,
Mm-hmm.
the ants have turned over the top 2 feet
Mm-hmm.
of soil 5 times.
Well, yes. That's important,
They're
right?
so much faster than the earth.
Yeah, there's
I
a
mean,
lot.
that was a very
Well, there's a lot going on, right? There's a
Yeah.
lot. There's a lot going on with so it gives you an idea of how much the biological stuff is affecting like the rate at which these soil processes are happening. Another interesting thing about this on the earthworms, there's been studies about native versus
Yeah.
the invasive earthworms. Nicole, do you know some stuff about this?
I mean, I know that it's really terrible. And, like, yeah, a lot of our native earthworms are just, not doing good.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to bring it up because I was like, but
No,
I'm
no,
glad
no.
you did.
No, yeah. Well, it's important. Yeah, because like these earthworms affect the not only are they moving the soil, but they like actually affect the community, like the plant community that they're in as well. One study they mentioned in this book talks about how they were growing big blue stem in pots, and then like putting native and then European earthworms in pots with these big blue stem, and found that the biomass in the native earthworm pots was far, far greater. So
Oh
like
wow.
whatever that they're doing in the soil, the way that they are and the way that this plant is adapted to those earthworms, like they're like the earthworms are helping the plant meet its nutritional needs in a way that European earthworms aren't.
That's crazy.
So
Wow.
it's interesting.
Mhm.
Very, very interesting.
Don't throw out your live bait, please. Whether it's earthworm, crayfish, or whatever.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
A good PSA. Um, and this brings me to the last sort of thing I wanted to talk about, because we have this soil ecosystem that is so closely linked to the place that it's in,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the species of plants that exist there. It needs to be a factor when we're talking about restoration of an environment,
Mm-hmm.
is thinking about that soil ecosystem. There's a paper that came out last year that was a literature review of it was called Current and Future Perspectives on Microbially Focused Restoration Strategies in Tallgrass Prairies. That's by Ellen Badger Hansen, and I don't remember. It's by Badger Hansen and Doherty. And this paper looked at some of the work that's been done to study the ways that the microbiome of a soil type actually affects the ability of a plant to reestablish and or to have a to have a restoration project be successful. Okay, so why look at this? They discuss how like the carbon storage in prairies, especially in prairie restorations, it doesn't rebound completely. Okay. We all know that, like, obviously we're by this point in the podcast, we're familiar with what happened with the tallgrass prairie, right? It got tilled, it got turned into monoculture. The soil eroded. A lot of that microbiome was cut through by plows and was damaged extensively. Trying to restore that, you can have a lot of success with it, but the rate at which carbon storage happens in the soil doesn't always fully rebound. Like when we're looking at remnant prairies versus restored prairies, there's a difference there, and the difference is tied to that microbiome, like the microbial aspect of what's happening in the dirt. So, yes.
Could you help out that by like transporting soil from like the old site into like the new site?
Yes, that is one of the things that they do. Okay, so they do what's called so they have a couple different strategies. They do inoculations, which would be like specifically infecting. I say infecting like it's a bad thing, but like inoculating soils with certain types of bacteria that you'd hope to see there to see what happens. But they also do like whole soil transplants. I don't know why, like, every time I think about this, I think of fecal transplants.
That's what I was thinking, too. Yeah. I'm so glad I wasn't the only one.
Okay, yeah.
But I was thinking of that. Like, you got to reestablish your healthy gut microbiome.
Exactly.
Like, give them a little pill, a poop pill. Like,
it's the same concept, yes. But doing it for an ecosystem instead.
Yes.
The fact that that's, like, a relatable piece of, like, data to, like, point back to.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
For sure. Okay, but yeah, there are ways that they do try to intentionally restore microbes in a prairie. And so that's what this paper looked at, was how effective is all that being. So one of the things that they were finding was that the microbiome affects a lot within a prairie, everything from the diversity to the like the successional progression, right? Because you've got bacteria and you've got fungus, that mycorrhizal fungus, that have very specific relationships to plants within a normal microbiome, right? It's evolved over huge, a very long time scale to have very specific relationships. So when they try to inoculate soil with specific kinds of fungus or rhizobia, that's that like root bacteria, it greatly increased the productivity of those plants. Okay, so like actually putting this bacteria or this fungus into the soil really increased the productivity of certain plants. However, the community effects then become a little bit harder to control because you're giving one particular plant a better competitive advantage because not every plant has that particular relationship with this bacteria or this fungus.
Okay.
They did say that this can be finessed, which is, I love that as a verb, finesse it, in a field restoration though, because they look at it in greenhouse studies. It's like, oh, we gave this plant, the kind of bacteria it likes, it went crazy. In an actual field setting, it goes a little bit better because there are other pressures on the plant that keep it from just, having a complete competitive advantage. So that's very fun. So inoculating is one way they do it. There's some climate-driven studies or studies focusing on climate-driven changes specifically as it relates to drought, they found that inoculation was useful. Specifically, and this kind of goes back to our savannas episode, they would specifically inoculate cool season C3 plants because we talked about C4 plants being the ones that, like, when it gets very hot, they, very hot, very dry, they tend to dominate because they've got that special panic room photosynthesis thing going on. Okay. Yeah. They found that, if you inoculate the cool season plants, it does help them promote, be able to compete by giving them the specific bacteria that they need, helps them compete with those C4 plants. So, could be an important thing for, like, the climate resistance of a prairie.
Okay.
Prevent it from completely changing.
Wow.
Yes. Whole soil transplants, like Nicole mentioned, from remnant prairies, they yield some varied results as well, based on, again, and it might be because the microbiome of one specific prairie, if we were to go, to a remnant prairie up in, Chase County or whatever, and bring some dirt down here, it might not be quite the same composition. Okay. And it might not have the exact intended effect, but it does yield success in some situations. I think the kind of what the issue they're looking at is that they really need to do more work, and the conclusion of this paper was they need to do more work to really understand what's going on at the micro level in the soil ecosystem, because it's, that is what's driving a lot of these interactions.
Yeah.
It's really crazy. Soil amendments were another thing, because this is something you can always do, right?
A soil amendment? Is that a thing we're supposed to know about? Is that like a common phrase or?
I think did we talk about it a little bit in the native garden episode, maybe? Soil amendments?
I mean, we should have, but like adding, like in a garden, you'd be like adding fertilizer, adding compost.
That's what that means,
like
basically. It's just,
Okay.
improving and trying to, change the composition of soil. There's a lot of different things they studied, and looking at how it changed and how it changed the microbial community. They would add stuff like biochar, which mimics the products of like a burn.
Oh, okay.
And that would improve the carbon storage. Trying to see if, like, adding this stuff, does it shift positively the diversity of a microbiome. There's one study in Kansas where they added a bunch of sawdust at the start of a prairie restoration, and then found that the microbial biomass really shifted in a positive direction from that.
Fascinating.
They add, in some cases, what's called methyl cellulose to mimic like decomposition products.
Okay.
That also shifted things in a positive way. So there's a lot of things you can do to help the microbiome in soil by adding stuff to it. And that was also kind of like, that was kind of like the wrap up, or like the bottom line of that soil science class I took, was like, just add more organic matter to your soil.
Yeah.
Like, that's, is your soil not doing great? Add some dead stuff to it. Like,
Yeah.
perfect. So that also really helps. But it's an interesting part, right? So looking at that little tiny, the really micro scale stuff that's happening in a prairie environment, in a grassland environment, is hugely essential to the restoration of the entire thing, right? I just thought that was a very interesting perspective to take. To make these kinds of restoration projects sustainable, you do have to think very small.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. Like, it makes sense 100%, but I feel like it's definitely not something that is done very often. People just kind of throw out seeds and they're like, we did it.
Yeah, right.
It's like,
right, yeah. There's
prairie restored. We see grass and some flowers.
Yeah. And there's, it might be a lot more complicated than that to get it truly back to like functional status. You know what I mean? That's not a bad thing.
Uh-huh.
It's
because we know how to make it
Yeah.
better.
yes,
It's just a matter of actually doing
it's,
it.
You know, yeah, we're understanding more and more about the real ecology that's going on there.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
that's a good thing.
Mhm.
And so to conclude, like, this is why I think soil is so interesting to me. Okay, is because like you have like soil is like a ecological like microcosm, right? You pick up like a soil aggregate, okay, of all that stuff glued together, okay.
The bacteria film.
You pick up one of those, and it's like you've got like every domain, every kingdom of life in there. You have centuries of death and decay. You have millennia of weathered rock and mineral. Okay. You have nutrients that have been blasted out of the atmosphere by lightning, washed into soil by storms, and then drawn back out of the ground by roots. You've got a complete food web in there. You know, and it's just all like, it's all like right there, you know, like in this little kind of little space, right, between, you know, like, you know, earth and sky. You've got this little soil layer, and there's like so much going on there, and it's really interesting to think about. You know, it changes the way like I look at nature in general, is by thinking about, you know, from the ground up. And yeah, that's kind of my deal. So go look at some dirt.
Is it safe to touch it?
Yeah. Don't eat it, but
Mostly
like,
kidding, but yeah.
yeah, just
Okay.
go like, yeah, go out there, getting some dirt.
Get a tetanus shot.
Get a tetanus shot if you want. Yeah, probably should keep current on that anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, go see what's in there. Look at it under a microscope if you got one. There's some fun stuff in there. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
That was really beautiful.
Well, thank you, Alan.
I feel like I talked to you about dirt for so long.
A
And I
podcast
apologize.
episode length. It was perfect.
Okay.
Oh, well, I have a lot of things to think about now. Thank you, Alan, and thanks everybody else for listening. The Best Biome is produced by us through our nonprofit Grassland Groupies, which is dedicated to inspiring the conservation of grasslands and now very much inspired to conserving their soils.
Yes.
In our show notes, you can find our website and all the details you need to get a hold of us. If you enjoyed the show and want to support us, tell your friends about us and leave a review on Podchaser or Apple Podcasts. We could not do this without your support. So we'll be back in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bye.